thought I saw a bird of prey, but I think it's actually just a leaf. I need to book an eye test. Hello everybody, welcome to North Wales and to a video sponsored by Lumix. I'm out with my G9 this late afternoon, early evening. What do you call 4:45? Is that afternoon or? I don't know, doesn't matter. And I'm just out to enjoy the mountains really, and maybe to get a couple of pictures along the way. And I thought at the same time I could do a quick video about some tips that I wish I'd known when I started my, I was going to say photography career, but I don't mean that, my photography hobby before that. When I started photography, basically, things I wish I'd known when I started photography. Starting with something that sounds really, really obvious, but I've found has had a huge impact on my photography, and that is looking up at my surroundings when I'm out in places like this. I'll tell you what, I'll do a demonstration. So yeah, usually I'd be doing this, or looking at my phone, texting or whatever. What I'm actually talking about is walking along like this, you know? And it doesn't look weird, that's the beauty of it. It doesn't look strange at all. You don't look like Mary Poppins or... Sounds obvious, like I said, but if you really think about it, I'm pretty sure that you don't spend anywhere near as much time looking up at your surroundings when you're in a place like this as you think you do. Particularly if you're like me and you're clumsy and you want to spend a lot of time looking down to make sure that you don't fall on your face. Or you might check your map quite a lot like I do to see just how lost you are. But yeah, I've found that actively reminding myself to look up A, improves my photography because I find more compositions, I find like gaps between the trees where there's mountains and stuff. And B, I find it just makes me appreciate where I am a lot more, and I enjoy my time in the outdoors, whether that's in a city or in a place like this, a hell of a lot more if I've appreciated what is around me. And yeah, that sounds quite whimsical, I think, but try it. Yeah, it certainly helped me with those two things, and I've got a lot of photos that I wouldn't otherwise have got if I hadn't have actively told myself to spend more time looking up at my surroundings. Tip number 2 is, what's tip number 2? Oh yeah, I have written it down. Tip number 2 is that everything in photography is basically just an opinion. Yes, there are technicalities and sciences involved in camera making itself, but as far as making photos, everything is just an opinion. There is no right and wrong, it's an art. And I think all too often people get hung up, and I certainly got hung up when I was starting in photography, in hanging off the last word of everyone that was trying to teach photography and taking whatever they were saying as gospel. The fact is that if you spend years honing your own skills and you take what you like from people and you discard what you don't from what they're saying, then the chances are you'll end up with your own way of doing things, which may well be much better than anything you've ever heard anyway. So yeah, do your own thing as far as photography is concerned, I think, because like I say, there is no right and wrong. And that goes for what I'm saying right now. Maybe there is a right and wrong. I'm pretty sure there's not. And also tip number 3 that I wish I'd known earlier, which kind of dovetails with tip number 2, is that it's really hard to get information from the very best photographers in the world. I mean, I make YouTube videos in the same way that any other photography YouTuber makes videos, in that we're doing it partly because we're not the photographers who can command $10,000 and $20,000 day rates. If we could, speaking personally, I probably wouldn't spend my time making YouTube videos. It'd be easier to just go to a set and press a button and pick up my $10,000 for a day's work. I can't do that, and therefore YouTube is a good avenue, and that's changing slightly because over time YouTube has become more lucrative, and if you get millions of followers, then chances are you can earn just as much money as you could as one of the top commercial photographers. But basically it's very difficult, as I say, to get the best information from the very best people, and therefore that's even more of a reason to not necessarily hang off the last words of people like me who are not like the top world-class photographers. And I found that really frustrating when I was starting out in photography, that I couldn't get information from the people at the very top, the world-class photographers. But I've learned as time has gone on that you can pick up things from people who aren't the world's best photographers, and thankfully some of you seem to have learned some things from me, which is a relief. And whoever you're listening to, whether it's another amateur, a professional, or someone that's really, really world-class, there will be things that you agree with them on and things that you disagree with them on, and that's perfectly fine because it means that you can take what you like, discard what you don't, and come up with your own style, which I think is completely the point of photography in the first place. I will do tip number 4. I'm just enjoying the sun for a minute because it's quite cold up here, so I'm very glad of it. Right, tip number 4 is that gear matters. Of course gear matters. There's a reason that I don't take most of the photos that I take on my phone, and there's a reason most professional photographers don't take the pictures they take on their phone. As I said, this video is sponsored by Lumix. I use a G9. I've used a G9 long before I was a Lumix ambassador, and there is a reason that I use this camera. And I wouldn't recommend this camera with a micro four thirds sensor to people, for example, who take only night shots, because there are better sensors suited to that particular job. What most people don't grasp, I think, about gear is that it's highly individual. People on forums argue all the time about what's the best gear, what's the best sensor, what's the best camera, when actually it's really difficult to say a lot of the time because we've all got completely different needs. And for example, the best consumer computer in the world is probably some whopper of a desktop. I don't know what it is, I probably should have looked it up, but there's probably some crazy desktop that you can spend, I don't know, £20,000 on that would be absolutely unbelievable. But if you're an author, like a children's book author, let's say, for the sake of argument, and you travel a lot, chances are you don't want to write a book on that computer. You'd much prefer a tiny little laptop that travels well and doesn't take up too much space. That is the best tool for that particular job. And it's much the same with cameras, and that doesn't get considered enough, I don't think, on all the arguments that you see on forums and places like that. This sun is lovely. Yes, give me some final vitamin D before the winter comes. Tomorrow, by the feel of the temperature. Thing number 5 I wish I'd known sooner is just how intimately you need to know your camera. So for those of you interested in taking the kind of photos that I take, that's pretty messed up the exposure, isn't it? I will make your mind up. So yeah, for those of you who are interested in taking the kind of photos that I take, you might be interested to know that I'd say 50 to 60% of them, I have a window of... Doing my head in this is... So I have a window of a few seconds for half or a bit more than half of my photos, I'd say, to get the shot, which means that I need to know exactly how to navigate the settings of my G9 without looking at any of the buttons, and I need to do it as quickly as possible, otherwise I'll miss the shot. And for the first couple of years I didn't really pay attention to all the settings on my camera, and I thought I could just dither and take all the time in the world, and that meant that I missed loads and loads of shots and I got really frustrated. After that couple of years I recognised how important it was, and I used to set myself little challenges and play little games with myself with different scenarios on what I'd need to change my settings to and how I'd go about doing it. Very, very sad, very geeky, but in the long run it's hugely important that you get to know your camera as well as you possibly can, because it'll mean that you're able to make use of more opportunities for good pictures. So whether it's light that only lasts a few seconds, or an animal, or a car, or some sort of situation that's only a very, very short period of time that you want to take a photo of, then you'll really benefit from knowing just how to get to the point of being able to take that photo with all the right settings on your camera. Again, that sounds very, very obvious, but I'm just saying what it took me a while to learn. Probably won't take most people a couple of years to recognise that. I'm not the quickest in many ways. It's getting a bit blowy. Yeah, thing number 6 I wish I'd known when I started out is just how important story is, and comparatively how little the looks of an image actually matters for the life of an image. I don't know if that makes sense. What am I trying to say? So I talk about story a lot on this channel, and people often ask what I mean by story. And basically, if you see an image, as you often do in things like documentary photography, that just compel you straight away, and they make you ask lots of questions such as, oh, I wonder what's just happened, or what's about to happen, or I wonder what that's doing there, or what's that person doing? And if you're asking questions like that, then the image has a story. And often with images like that, documentary type images, because they're natural and flowing and spur of the moment, they don't have lots of thought going to them about things such as colour theory. And they're often not particularly sharp, and they're often not composed perfectly, but they have bags and bags of story, so it doesn't matter. And obviously the holy grail with photography is to have an image that's got loads of story and character, but also looks really nice. That's kind of the best of both worlds. But if you've got an image that people are looking at and they're going, oh, that's quite pretty, but they've got no further questions, they're not drawn to it, they're not curious about it, then chances are that image won't have a particularly long lifespan, and therefore in my eyes it's not a particularly good image. Again, I'm just little old me with my opinion. I mean, not everyone might agree with that, but I think story is the most important thing, and that can be quite difficult in, say, settings like this, for example, outdoor settings or places where you're taking photos of big vistas or big wide-angle shots of mountain ranges and stuff, because quite often those things look pretty, but there's no kind of immediate subject, for example, and so often it's quite difficult to come up with photos and compositions that pose questions, and therefore those images a lot of the time don't, in my eyes at least, stand the test of time. And it's not easy to come up with images that tell stories or at least pose questions, but it's certainly the thing to aim for over trying to make photos that just look quite nice. Thing number 7 that I wish I'd known sooner, as it threatens to rain, is that resolution is not the biggest deal in the world. Now, it took me probably 2 or 3 years to realise that I didn't need a camera with 30, 40, 50, 60 megapixels to be able to print big on the odd occasion that I wanted to, particularly then when it was just a hobby and I was very unlikely to be printing big. Now, the fact is that with my G9, for example, this has a 20 megapixel sensor, and I could print A0 with this, no problem. In fact, I could print billboards with this, no problem. Because when you look at a billboard, you don't do so from like here, you do so from across the street, the appropriate viewing distance. Good printing, as I've said before on this channel, is all about appropriate viewing distances. And when I print A0 for somebody's living room, presumably that's quite a big living room, and they're going to be looking at the print from a few meters away, again, not like this. And by only having a 20 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, it means I've got a relatively small setup. I mean, this is my telephoto lens. It's absolutely tiny and weighs nothing. And also, this camera has a really, really high frame rate, which means that I don't miss shots that I might miss if I had a camera with more resolution and therefore slower typically frame rates, because the write speeds are longer and therefore you can't have as high a frame rate and all that kind of stuff. So again, as I said before, gear is highly personal, but it took me a long time to learn that a camera like this was perfectly fine for me even if I wanted to print big. I thought resolution was something that you needed bundles of, and well, that's just not the case. It's definitely getting colder and darker, and I think it's potentially about to get wetter. I think it might be time to go home. I was going to hang around for Blue Hour, which starts in 18 minutes, but there wasn't much of a sunset and I don't think there's going to be much blue in Blue Hour, so I think I'll call it a day. One day, not today, but one day, that mountain, those trees, and maybe a windless water, nice reflecting water with maybe a duck or something going across it, will make a fantastic Blue Hour shot, but yeah, it's not going to be today. Not going to be today. Well, I didn't get a Blue Hour, but I certainly packed for one, and this will help me get back to my car, I think. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Lumix for sponsoring this video, and thank you to Thomas Edison for electricity, who will indeed help me get to the car. Did he have anything to do with batteries, or is batteries something that's completely different to... I don't know. You can't really see me at all, can you? Hang on. I mean, some of you probably enjoy the fact that you can't see me, I'd imagine, but I'll ruin that for you. Yes, if you wouldn't mind leaving comments before you leave on things that you have wished that you discovered earlier in your photography journey, that would be great, so I could read from them and learn from them, and other people can too. My last thing that I wish I'd learned earlier is that, well, it's quite fitting actually for today, but photography is a process, not a result. Like, I've just spent, what, 4 or 5 hours out in the wilderness, and I wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for the chance of getting photos. So even though I've got nothing, it doesn't matter because I've enjoyed my time in the wilderness. And yeah, it took me a while to learn that, and I had lots of kind of frustrating days out with my camera not getting anything, thinking that it was the end of the world, when actually it wasn't at all. It was just good to be out. So yeah, that's a positive. Oh, this really hurts my arms. Still, could be worse. If I was somewhere where there were grizzly bears, I'd be quite spooked out now, but they don't exist in Wales, and I don't think, as spooky as it looks at this time of day here, I don't think I'm going to be attacked by a sheep. I mean, I probably shouldn't say things like that until I get back to the car. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.